Hello, everybody. This is Sue Frederick, and I am so excited to have a mystical conversation with everyone today. And I want to have a mystical conversation where we lose ourselves in the wonders of divine mysteries, share dreams from the other side, intuitive nudgings, and soul mission yearnings. I'm Sue Frederick. I'm the author of 11 books, including Through a Divine Lens, Bridges to Heaven, and the Sacred Numerology Workbook. My guest today is an extraordinary soul. She has and is walking the path of being both a grieving mom and a very powerful psychotherapist. So let me read her biography. Sally McQuillen is a psychotherapist in private practice specializing in addiction, recovery, grief, and trauma healing. An avid reader with a double major in writing and dance criticism. I love that, Sally. She began working in public relations and marketing prior to obtaining her master's degree in social work. Reaching for Beautiful is her new book. I'll say that title again. Reaching for Beautiful. It's her new book, her first book, telling the story of her extraordinary child, Christopher, who crossed how many years ago, Sally?
9 years ago in 2016.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk about that journey in two different lenses because Sally is the psychotherapist who's had to look at it through the psychological viewpoint. She's the mother who walked that journey. And then the soul view also that, her beautiful son Christopher is and was a 33 master soul, Aries 33. And that means, in my point of view, he came to be the angel, to not walk an ordinary life, to lift us up the mundane way of living on this earth realm. And you, as his blessed mother, had to love him through what you call his wild child life, right?
Exactly.
So why don't you tell us about Christopher?
There could not have been a more beautiful, wilder soul. And on the earth, he had me out over my skis from the very beginning. He was a handful of energy, and I just loved him in such a way, perhaps because he was my firstborn, perhaps because I had some sort of intuitive knowing that he wouldn't be here forever. There was always this sense that I was sort of attempting to hang on and he was slipping through my fingers. So that meant that I was challenged by attempting to um, sort of somehow have some semblance of control, and I've come to learn so much from him, both both before he crossed over and since.
Yeah. And how old was Christopher when you became a psychotherapist? Were you already one when he was born?
It's interesting. I had gotten my master's degree. I was beginning to practice. I'd gotten my first job and I got pregnant. And needless to say, consistently, I was morning, noon, and night sick. And he was already a handful in my tummy. So consequently, I had to tell them I wasn't going to be able to stay. I needed to take care of myself through the pregnancy. And then once he was born and he was a colicky baby, I contemplated, early on potentially going back to work, but I didn't want to. I
Yeah.
didn't want to. And
Your
I'm
your
so
soul
grateful.
your soul
Mhm.
knew that this was a very special angel child and needed your attention.
Undoubtedly, undoubtedly. And so then for years, I went on to have my two other children, and I had the privilege of essentially being a full-time mother. I did various side jobs, sort of creative things, and volunteered and tried to spend time with each of my children in their classrooms, all of those things. But then it was interesting when Christopher went back to college, was the point at which I decided to embark on this next chapter of, and I'd let my license lapse, so I needed to go through, relicensing myself and all of that and getting my hours. And so I worked in several outpatient addiction centers and then ended up in private practice. But the interesting thing is that before Christopher died, and then once he did, I knew and know that he is in this work with me, that I'm meant to be doing this work.
Yes, I love that story for so many thousands of reasons. And one of them is because, mainstream psychology tells so many of my grieving clients, and even a therapist told me in 1980 when my husband died, all right, well, this is something you've got to put in the past, and you've got to get on with your life, and your child is gone, and they told me your husband is gone, and you need to create this new life. And meanwhile, those spirits are coming to us in dreams, in my case, getting in bed with me at night and talking to me, And then
Yes.
if you go and tell your mainstream therapist this, they'll often say, well, then you need some medication. So, as a therapist, how did you walk the dance of him crossing and then communicating with you, and then you knowing what mainstream psychology would say about that?
I think that I have been blessed with, I'm not a medium or anything like what it is, these gifts that many of you have, but I do have this intuitive sense. And because I am in recovery from my own addiction, I was introduced to a spiritual way of living that was designed to connect me to a higher power and an intuition. And so I've come to trust that and listen in. And so even though I had some sort of, oh, no kidding. I grew up with an alcoholic father. I stopped drinking myself at 25. I've had children who struggle with addiction. I'm married to a man who's in recovery. It's everywhere. Do you really want to go into this field? I mean, at least if you're going to be a therapist, could you do something different? And but I've learned that it's our experience, our most painful experiences often, that if we're working on our own healing effectively enough, enable us to really support the people that we see with the kind of compassion that they deserve.
That's right. I've always said that our greatest work is bringing our greatest pain to illuminate the pain for others as we've walked through it, that we turn around and say, here's what I've learned, let me help you. And, I love it that you're doing that so beautifully. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is your path, because we know that
Mm.
Christopher is this angel. And actually, remind me, I want to talk about that his soul is from the angelic realm. So let's come back to that in a minute.
Ooh.
But your path is so beautiful, Sally, for what you're doing. You're a Taurus 8 path. There cannot be a more grounded, strong, powerful, centered journey for a soul than the Taurus 8 because it means you came to stand strong in the earth realm, hold your light, and say, I know that life is painful, but come and let me guide you and comfort you. The 8 is about using your power, owning your power spiritually, physically, emotionally, every single way. And not only has therapy brought you to that, but Christopher has definitely in his crossing brought you to that, right? That you are the lighthouse, the beacon, the one who as I that journey of devastating loss, and now let me bring you to the light. Do you know that you're an 8 path?
I had no idea that I am an eight path, and yet that resonates very deeply with me. That I feel as if my challenge and calling is to stay grounded and to stay in the light. And interestingly, in that first year, which is the period of time that I write about in the book, when I'm yearning and when I feel as if the ground has fallen out beneath my feet, I'm attempting to restore some kind of, or actually gather some sort of centeredness and peace and strength, and developing the belief that Christopher is always ever present. His spirit has given me so much strength that it promotes my ability to at least attempt to stay in the light.
So I have a couple of questions. In the moment of his crossing in your book, and I just know from talking to Joe, your husband, who I've also done, I did a soul regression therapist with a therapy session with him where he went back into his past lives and saw all of your connections. It was
Oh
very
my
cool.
goodness.
But also just from hearing the story and talking to you all, I know that you were getting little spirit nudges from the very beginning of the experience of his crossing. Do you mind sharing those minutes and what it was like?
I don't. I did feel it's interesting when I returned to looking at what I'd written. I because it's funny over time. One of the things that I really wanted to do, I had a number of goals in writing, but one of them was to capture my son's life and not forget things.
Right.
But I'm also conscious of the fact that I then have these more crystallized memories of what it was like in that trauma, and there was such trauma, but I did know instantly the moment that my husband got off the phone with his friend's father, who was um, letting us know that four boys had gone missing, that he was no longer here on earth. I just knew it internally.
Did you feel his spirit coming to you in those hours of shock? And maybe you should share with the listeners like how he crossed, because I know it's a very dramatic story, if you don't mind sharing that.
It is dramatic. He and three other boys went to a lake house. It was their college Christmas or holiday break, and I was envisioning this was on the night of January 2nd. He'd already come through celebrating New Year's Eve in the city at the bars, and was partying and had come through that. And when he suggested that he was just going to go up to a friend's lake house with a bunch of other boys, I thought, oh, how lovely. I can take a breath. And and then that morning when we received the phone call, ultimately, it wasn't that long after the boys couldn't be found that it was determined that they had decided to go out on a frozen lake, the four of them in a canoe, and none of them survived. So it's excruciatingly painful to think about the the fear, the pain that any of them may have felt, and that was shattering for me, to have not been able to be with my child to comfort him in that kind of a moment. And so I did seek specialized therapy to help me with that, and I could revisit the way that I pictured those moments. And then also, mediums have been so instrumental in providing me with a lot of assurances that he did not suffer.
Yeah,
And
and that's an
yes,
important thing for moms. I talk to the moms all the time about how we get stuck in our idea of their last hours and their last moments and how they may have suffered. And yet the soul is not there. The soul is already lifting up. I mean, the minute things started to go south, I can guarantee you all of those boys, or at least Christopher, started to already leave their body, and we're seeing it from a different perspective. And the other thing I know from talking to so many moms who've lost a child is that the spirit of that child, Christopher, instantly came to you to comfort you in that moment, whether you can could kind of feel it. But that's what spirits do when they're crossing. They get out of the body quickly before there's big suffering, and they look around and go, "Oh, I better go see my mom. I better go wrap my arms around her." So, tell me about the that when you did
I
feel.
love that imagery, um and I believe it's true. I do. I do believe it's true. And I had the experience of talking to a medium who because a lot of in early grief, there's this inclination to feel so much guilt. It's
Right.
just our human nature to sort of come to attempt to have control over all that we're powerless over.
Especially for moms, because you carry the
Yes,
DNA of that child inside of you forever. So you feel completely responsible, no matter how old they are, right? So you
yes.
had to think to yourself, well, gee, I should have said no, don't go to the lake, or
Oh,
something like that.
absolutely. That was exactly what I was doing, was beating myself up about some of that. And mothers are meant to keep their children alive. So
Right.
I felt as if I failed in being a good mother. And so I really needed to process through all of that. But the medium who I've come to love, who I first met, she was talking to me about, she said, this is going to be sort of an unconventional reading. And she was just talking to me about one of her young daughters, and basically suggesting that Christopher had come to play with her, which seemed very, that they had a lot of chaos in their household, that there were lots of kids coming and going, and dogs and animals, and it was frenetic. And she said, oh, he just loves it here. And I said, of course he would. And this little girl who was maybe 6 had the same gift as her mother and could see Christopher, and was um, basically taking some comfort with him in the fact that she didn't really want to go to school, and her mother was having trouble getting her to go to school. And so Chris, of course, was coming through to this medium suggesting that, oh, I put my mother through that. I didn't want to
Right.
go.
And then
Uh,
telling that medium to get in touch with you by spirit, right?
yeah,
To help you.
somehow, yes.
Yes.
I don't know how all of these stars align. It's so incredibly magical.
But
And
let's talk about that guilt piece for a moment, because I know that every single person listening who's lost a loved one, even a partner, a husband, a wife, we go to guilt right away. And I
right,
remember when my
right.
husband died from cancer and I had taken care of him with hospice help. I was doing everything in my power to help him, and he hung on so much longer than he needed to for me to be ready.
Mm,
And when he finally crossed, I was like, oh my God, I didn't give him enough of this, or I gave him the wrong amount of that. And the hospice nurse, who even back in the 70s, I believe hospice nurses were angels even then, she sat with
truly.
me and said, he was dying from colon cancer, Sue. You could have done everything right, and he would still have left us. And then I started asking God and Spirit, well, then why do souls leave early, and why am I still here? And what is the purpose of all this? And the
Yes,
answer I got that has brought me so much comfort and led my work is that we all come in with a soul contract and a soul agreement for that exit point, and that there's nothing you can do to change another person's path or their exit point. What do you think of that idea?
that is something that gives me tremendous solace. When I first got wind of this idea, and again, it was through a medium, because part of what you're doing in the midst of early grief is trying to make meaning and sense of exactly as you described, like why would this happen and what am I meant to learn? Because I've always felt that we're just here to learn and grow and evolve. But I didn't frankly love the idea that Christopher was departing just for the sake of my learning or my husband's learning or my other children's learning. But at the same time, to think in terms of a contract, it somehow things gelled for me. It gave me peace. And I firmly believe that's exactly what was meant to have happened. He was not meant to live. I cannot picture him having lived any longer than his 21 years.
And
And
guess what? I hear that all the time from moms. And I even heard it from my husband Paul's mom. When Paul crossed, he was in his
really,
early 30s. And as we were grieving, she said, I always knew that he couldn't stay here, that I could never see him as an old man. And I remember thinking at that time that these angel souls, like your beautiful son Christopher, they don't like it in this dense realm called Earth that we're here walking through. They are much more comfortable and happy and at peace in the higher realms that I call the divine realms. And they work from there to help all of us. And Christopher is definitely on the team of angels trying to help humanity evolve. Good luck, Christopher.
truly, he was and is so powerful that I just know that like down to my toes to be true. And
And
of
his
course, he
name as
gave
Christopher. I mean, look at this. The name of Christ in the name, and he's a 33 master soul. And in the original transcription of the Aramaic Bible, and many going way back, we see that many people believe that the soul of Jesus was on the path of the 33. They call it the path of Christ consciousness, which is all about realizing we're all connected. We're here to love each other. We're here to have compassion, and that the ordinary rules of life are not true. That's what the Christ is and was teaching, and that's Christopher.
it is just so deeply Christopher. And so those parallels are not for a moment lost on me. And when he was here, I called him, the angel of my world. And it's interesting that he then used that term of endearment with one of his close friends, and she ended up getting an angel in a world tattooed on the back of her neck. But it is absolutely the way that I experience him. He is doing so much work from the other side to guide us and to help us understand. And he brought me directly to spiritual teachings that are all about being connected and this idea that we are only here to love. And throughout his lifetime, he helped me recognize the importance of trying to relinquish fear. I was in so much fear. And I need to apply some of those teachings to my living children today, to just remember, as you said, that we could turn ourselves upside down, we could do everything right, and they are still going to meet with challenges of their own, and they shouldn't be spared from them.
Right. It's how we
And
learn. And that's the hardest lesson for mothers, that we believe because they are completely dependent on us at first, that we're in control of their life and death and their path and everything. And yet they are our teachers. Our children are always more evolved souls than we are. So as soon as they can learn to function in this heavy, dense realm, they begin teaching us. They begin breaking the rules. They begin breaking our heart, and it's all the journey of the mother going, ah, now I understand. I'm here to surrender to what you're teaching me. And so, how would you describe that, especially with your other children? How have they walked through this?
They have had, it's so interesting the way grief plays out with each and every other family member and every friend and everyone who's been touched by um, Christopher's departure. And so they each have had, I think I could say that each of them have had some more conflictual feelings because Christopher was not always an easy big brother to have. A lot of energy. He sort of took up all the air in the room, and then with mom and dad being preoccupied with with concern over him. It's interesting. He had at least three near-death experiences before we lost him at 21. So there was always this looming sense of, I mean, it was um, interesting how even when he had his 3-year period during which he was sober, he still, for example, ended up falling down a mine shaft and nearly died were it not for the angels, I think, giving him a little bit longer here with us.
And that was for all of you. I mean, whenever I talk to these spirits, I always hear the story of, I had a couple of potential exits, and I realized in those potential soul exits that my mother or my family could never recover yet. And so I chose to stay a little longer. But there's always that final exit point, that there's no way of getting out of, I say. But I feel that Christopher, as the angel soul, was watching from the higher realms all of you and your development and your strength. And he stayed even longer, than possible just to make sure that you had everything you needed in your emotional and spiritual toolbox to be able to walk through this and then help others the way you and your husband have done, and also the way your children someday will do after they've
Yes.
walked through it the way they have to walk through it.
And they're each walking through it bravely. And it's interesting. I don't think that I love what you said about the density here on Earth and I don't know that, I mean, each of us, McQuillens, my husband, we're pretty sensitive people. And so this world and the suffering that comes is something that we need to work hard to strive beyond, to sort of reach beyond because we're so deeply touched by it. And so I don't know that Christopher could have. It's too when I sometimes that gives me some solace um that that is how he's spared, that he's in the light now, that he's not um having to bear witness to some of the things that are
Or that he's seeing it from the realm of angels where he can help. And
yes.
he's lifting us up to try to have a better day, to see it differently, to see that there's always light. That's the job of those beautiful
Mm.
souls. And by the way, your whole family are angelic realm soul origins. And what I mean by that is there's different ways that our souls choose to incarnate on earth, and some souls come from the angelic realm, which means they haven't spent a lot of time on the earth. So you all land here and you
Oh.
look around and you go, this place is crazy. And then that's often why you are driven to substance, alcohol or drugs, because you want to lift up and see it differently somehow. And that first drink or that first thing of drugs, you get that higher view, that different perspective. And so then you think, oh, well, that's the path. And then that never works out for us. But it's a spiritual seeking, I believe, from very delicate, sensitive, beautiful, aware souls. And as a posse of souls, all of you agreed this was going to be a hard walk on the earth realm, and you were even going to have devastating loss in it. And you were going to finally, all of you, be able to open your hearts through the pain and make a huge difference in the world, helping others wake up to what we're really doing here. And there you are, Sally.
That was beautifully expressed, and it does feel to me like it's true. When I think about being a little girl, and I was a little bit, I was just prone to sadness and some fear, and I I began to feel as if I wasn't sort of meant to be here in the same way that I suspect Christopher, very much like his mother, um, just had a tender soul and felt different. And it's interesting that I was attempting to spare him from feeling different or feeling ashamed, and
Right.
then in fact that is the very thing that I mean he I prayed this prayer for him, that he could be a child of light, that he could enter the light. And then I was not really, I was unwittingly sort of then accepting that he would be the light
Right.
elsewhere. It's
Right.
interesting to me that, but I just think sometimes yeah, the very things that we think of as being,
Right.
there are blessing,
Yeah.
there are strength.
Our greatest tragedy, the thing we fear the most becomes the most enlightened aspect of our journey, waking us up. And, I just want to share that you being sad in your childhood, well, I can so relate to that. And what I've learned is that it really means we're missing the angelic realms. We're missing heaven. That's where we're from. And it's much
Mm.
happier there than it is here. And everything is filled with unconditional love in those higher realms. And when a sensitive soul like you, Christopher, your whole family lands here, you are going to be going, I have this memory of things being different and better. And we don't know what that means. I remember as like a 9-year old child standing in my family when they were arguing, going, it's not supposed to be this way. Like, I remembered heaven and I couldn't understand why humans were misbehaving. And I'm
I
sure
appreciate thinking
you
about it
felt
that
that
way.
way.
Absolutely. There's a little scene in my book that I'm kind of flashing back to where I'm looking down the stairs through the banister slats at my father coming in and getting home from work and going straight to the liquor cabinet, and the dread and the experience of just feeling very much alone. And so when I do, I like the way in which you put this, because I'm just appreciating it so much more deeply, that all of these things that we can't see but that we know inside to be true are true.
So, what would you say a reader is going to take away from your beautiful book called Reaching for Beautiful, a memoir of loving and losing a wild child by Sally McQuillen? What is a reader going to take away from that book?
I hope that they will feel less alone, because I do venture into what it's like inside those early days and the need to process that inevitable guilt and forgive oneself and come to a place of peace by feeling through the feelings, but also deepening the appreciation for, I mean, really building faith that I couldn't survive if I didn't believe that Christopher's spirit was very much here with me in every way, shape, or form. He's in the air I breathe.
Well, I love that because, so much of what happens in grief is either we try to suppress the pain, and as we all know, you got to feel it to heal it, right? I mean,
Exactly.
I took 10 years in my 30s of raging at the world over grief because I had lost so many people I loved in my early 30s until finally I was able to say, all right, maybe being angry at the world isn't the right path. So let me really explore the spiritual, deeper meaning of this. And that's where you are. But the thing as a therapist, which gives you the dual lens approach, is we have to go to the dark side with our grief. We have to feel that rage, that horrible pain, that guilt, all of that in order to move it out of us, which then opens our frequency. Oh my gosh, there's Christopher with me, laughing, standing in that corner of the room. And that's then when we're able to see, wow, this isn't just someone leaving the earth realm and dying and being gone, that the soul
No.
is eternal. I love
Love is such a, yes, love is just, it's just overpowering. And so that stays, it just is very much, all that we love deeply becomes a part of us. He's always been a part of me and is evermore. And yes, there's so much I could say, but to begin to develop that sense of faith that that your loved one is wants you to also survive this
right.
and
And be
and have,
happy.
yes, and
Yeah,
have moments of joy,
right,
touch into the ache and then move through it, and that's not disloyalty to your
right,
child or to
right.
your loved one who's passed.
I mean, I remember sitting and I used to teach these grief shifting workshops to big groups, and we'd go around the circle and talk about our devastating loss so that we could then begin the journey of moving into the higher realms to look at it. And I remember this one man, an older gentleman, saying, my wife would never want to see me happy. She would want to see me grieving her for the rest of my life and being miserable. And I remember saying, that's your human view of it. And that may have been her human view of it while she was here, that she wanted you to grieve her forever. But the minute her soul lifted up, she was like, oh, now I see it all differently. Come on, pep up, husband, get happy, you know?
That's right. That's right. And energetically, in order to be in closer communication with our loved ones on the other side, we do need to sort of move closer. I guess it's vibrationally,
Right, it
and I
is.
feel as if vibrationally, to have a higher vibration is to release some of the
It is. See how you've learned all this spiritual tools. It's so important. You know, we have to have a little bit of a frequency shift up. It can be just to hope, it can be to gratitude, it can be to kindness. Those little shifts bring us into that higher frequency where then the spirit world has a very high frequency. We're more able to perceive it and see it and connect with spirit that way. And but then I also tell my grieving moms that don't worry if you're in a really dark place with grief. You can even say things like, beautiful departed loved one, lift my energy today. Help make me laugh so I can change my frequency and see you and feel you with me. And whenever grieving people do ask that prayer, it's always answered. Like suddenly they see something in the kitchen that reminds them of their departed and they're laughing, and now their frequency has shifted. So I love it that you know all these spiritual tools and yet you're also a therapist. How can
all of
people
it.
reach you? What is your website?
My website is www.sallymcquillen with an en.com.
Mhm.
And that's the best way to reach me. And my book is, available for pre-order at this time. It comes out on 4/1, which is timely because Christopher, his birthday being in April 4/15, I birthed him during that month, and I will be birthing this book in honor of him
So
that
people
month.
can go to Amazon and pre-order it then?
They can. I
Oh,
greatly appreciate that. And I hope that it does offer some hope and
oh, of course
enlightenment.
it will, Sally. And the other thing is, do you see clients by Zoom who don't live near you?
I do see clients in Florida. I'm licensed there, and I'm
Ah,
licensed in Illinois.
okay.
And then other alternative locations would mean that I would see them in a consulting kind of a basis.
Well, good. I'm going to send a lot of my grieving people to you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me, for Oh, I just feel uplifted having spoken to you. Thank you,
Oh,
Sue.
you're just a blessing to the world, Sally, and I love your whole family. You know, all of you are such angel souls, and Christopher is such a light, such a powerful being, such an angel. So many blessings to you, and thank you so much for today.
Thank you again for having